Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Thom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Bagel Logic Podcast. Well, I say welcome back because this is actually my first ever two-part episode. Holy mackerel. Because my guest, returning guest, it feels like you were just here about 30 seconds ago, because you were. But this is part two of the two-part discussion. We've talked all kinds of stuff, a lot of politics, whatnot. I'm going to shift gear. We got about 30 minutes or so, and I'm going to try to avoid politics this entire episode. How crazy is that? Let's see if we can do this. This will be like a challenge for you and I to see if we can make it through without mentioning the P word. Okay.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with the present. Now, I know we spoke a little bit before we actually went officially on air. Kind of a big milestone thing that happens in your life, that happens in a lot of guys' life that I can relate to, and that is indeed fatherhood. So. Yeah. You mentioned earlier about your dad. You know, your dad passed away. I mean, he was a young guy when he passed away. Now that you become a father, how do you think that's kind of connected you back to your dad? And what are the things that you find that you're doing the same, and maybe some things that you're doing a little bit different?
Wow, that's a great question. I find myself trying to take the same approach my dad did. My dad was great with all of his kids, I think. My dad was married 3 times, so he had 7 children from those marriages, 6 girls, 1 boy. So myself and my 2 youngest sisters are from my dad and my mom's marriage. And, seeing him and how he raised us, has really, kind of been the basis. Like, I haven't forgotten that. It's funny how people my age, and maybe you saw this when you became a parent, and there were like other people your age that were parents, and like you talk to them and they just seem to have like no clue what it was like, growing up and what their parents experienced, like raising you and how they raised you. And I get that a lot, like even within my own family, there's people that like, your parents didn't do that when they raised you. So, it kind of makes you scratch your head, but I try to keep those memories in there. Like whenever something comes up, and, my daughter is 5 months old, so it's not like she's going out and partying and coming home late or something, but,
you got like 3 or 4 months before that starts happening, at least.
Yeah.
Those 9 month olds, man, as soon as they get the car keys, they're crazy.
Yeah. So, there's not a whole much there, but I think, really, my dad, he brought, one thing that I think is worth highlighting in particular is that my dad was a stay-at-home dad, not by choice. He was disabled. And, I find myself in a similar position. I am a stay-at-home working dad. So I've been working from home throughout the entire pandemic, since March 2020. And so when Sarah and I found out that, we were expecting a baby, it was like, like right from the get-go, it's like, well, I'm here. I will continue to stay home as long as work will allow it. And I've been fortunate, work has continued to allow it. So, that is something I've drawn a direct connection to, that like, my dad was home with 3 kids, which is not an easy job. And here I am home with my, infant daughter. And, it's something that I do think about often, that, he had a lot to handle. And so my time, changing diapers, feedings every few hours, playtime, that pales in comparison to what my dad had to deal with 3 rowdy children and whoever we brought over to play with. But that's one big connection for sure, is that, there's a story that came out in the New York Times, and they talked about like these kind of absentee fathers during the pandemic and how all mothers are shouldering the load and all this stuff. And there was a picture that sticks with me that there's like this dad, and he's, crisply dressed, and he's sitting at this fancy desk in an office. And then, in the shot down the hallway, you see the mom like potty training the 2-3-year-old child. And they were highlighting like, all moms have it so tough because their husbands aren't doing anything. I'm like, well, I don't want to be that guy. I think that there's other, fathers like me out there that are in a similar position. I know for a fact because I've interviewed some of them while they've been at home, and you can hear their kids running around in the background. So, that stayed with me. And the memories of, my dad raising us and, making dinner, taking us to sporting events, all of that stuff, that stayed with me too. So I've drawn a connection to him in that way that, we've been, in different ways, stay-at-home dads.
Yeah, you touched on too. There's just that old stereotype. It just does not go away in terms of dads. And I've always, I was a custodial parent for 2 out of 3 of my kids, and I just remember going through the whole court system and the custody battle, and the thing that complicated it was just those things like, well, the mom is the one who is the caretaker. And I think that some of that goes back to previous generations where, like dads weren't the ones that changed the diapers, and you had these really specific gender norms and gender expectations. And maybe even that whole animal kingdom mentality of, the male cat or the male dog impregnating the mom and then just taking off and not really having any responsibility. But it's, I just wonder if that's one of those things that will hopefully, I think it's changing. Like you said, it's not untypical to have, you said, well, I'm not unusual. My dad was like this. He stayed home and took care of kids. I'm like that. I take care of kids. My son, Thom Jr., who's a dad, he's home with his kids or his kid and doing stuff too. But I think that again is always the tough part of being the dad. Now, do you know guys that ruin it for all the rest of us? They'll say something like, hey man, you want to go out, watch a football game or something? No, I got to babysit my kids tonight. I'm like, babysit your kids? Like you don't babysit your own children.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can say that, I proudly embrace like diaper changing and feedings and, playtime with my daughter and all of these things. But I know that, some of them have been in my own family that, that there are men that view themselves as like in those old fashioned gender norms where it's like, oh, I'm not touching a diaper. Are you kidding me? Unless I absolutely have to, unless my wife is, out of the country, then I'll change this diaper, but, no chance of that happening, normally. And, I think too that it's helped growing up in a house with mostly women, that you learn that, hey, there should be equality here, that, women can do things that men stereotypically do and vice versa. It doesn't make me feel less of a man by, feeding my daughter or changing her diaper or, changing her outfits or, whatever else, doing her hair. She's got quite a head of hair. So, but, I think, to some men like that would make them feel less than, and I think they're wrong. For me, it makes me feel even more of a man, that I'm being a good father to my daughter, that I'm, showing what a good father and what a good man looks like to her, so when she, grows up and, is looking for a beau that, she doesn't lower her standards, that she knows what the standard should be. And I think that that's important too. Because it's all, you need to build that foundation really to show what, good, how to treat people generally, but especially women, because, for a long time, my sister just went through this week with, her job, and she was, going to go on this work trip, and her boss, a male, took her off the trip basically because women don't golf. And I'm not joking. This is 2022. This was actually a reason why my sister was taken off a rather important work trip. They were going to go to this convention. And when she told me this, I was like, did the calendar, go back 50 years? Like what what happened here? But, this is, I want to play my part in changing that and in showing that, look, guys, we've had a run here. I don't want to say it's a good run, but it's time to realize that, women can do things, and, women should be treated with respect. And so that's a big part of it for me too. And to circle back to your first question, that's something my dad instilled in me, because, he always said, like, we treat women with respect in this house. My sisters and one of my sisters and I got into a fight once, and, she hit me and I hit her. We were very young at the time. I don't even think I was like 6 years old yet. And he told me, it's like, we don't do that. It doesn't matter what they do to you. You don't do that unless it's absolutely in self-defense that, your life is at risk, but you don't do that. You don't do that. And that's something that stayed with me, and that's all for my dad, really. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I raised sons, so as my son, I think I don't know, we've necessarily broached it to the level that you did in terms of just having an example for a male. But I mean, that was always one of my fears, that, raising my kids and just being a guy and not having a strong female figure, that they would have a hard time in terms of finding somebody later on down the road. But I think on some level, maybe the thing that I really kind of resonated with me is that it even doesn't even really matter in terms of male versus female, because, you have situations. I mean, I grew up with kids that had two moms. I didn't ever know anybody that had two. Oh, I guess I do know somebody that has two dads. But ultimately, the dynamic within the household, whether it's husband, wife, wife, sibling, cousins, grandparents, kids, grandkids, whatever, it really just comes down to the way you treat each other in that family dynamic is what is ultimately going to kind of permeate out into the rest of the world. So as a husband or a friend or a parent, you start treating your kid in a way that they perceive as disrespectful or mean or whatever. And again, there are parents that don't like being parents, and it's unfortunate, but then it becomes a learned behavior. This to me is normality. If everybody in the family, it's like sometimes people say, well, what happens in the family stays in the family. It really doesn't. It really does. It really does have this kind of effect that goes well beyond that, because that's where they learn to be humans. That's where they learn to socialize. That's where they learn boundaries. That's where they learn what functional and dysfunctional relationships are. And, the nature versus nurture. I mean, it's a real thing. And that's a huge responsibility as a parent. And as much as I'm sure right now you're enjoying that, the young kid part of it, it can get very complicated, but I feel like if you do it right, one day maybe my kids will someday be on a podcast saying as nice things as you said about your dad, and vice versa. And that's almost the only thing you can really hope for as a parent, that your kids at least look back and say, hey man, he was a good dad. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's something that you want to, set the tone for, like, because you figure that your own children are going to be parents someday. And, Sarah and I aren't done. We want to have at least one more child. And so, that's something that, you want to pass on, that, like, this is how you treat one another, and this is how you treat your children, and that you hope that they hold on to that and remember that. And so when the time comes that they are parents, that they take those, lessons, those life lessons in a way, and apply them, their own way. I think it's a big thing. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And the diaper thing, I don't know. I avoided changing a diaper for about 30 years, and I went between kids and grandkids and nephews and everything. And I will never forget this, because it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And I mean, when my kids were young, I did it. You know what? Guys don't like changing diapers any more than women do. Can we just put that out there? Nobody likes changing a dirty. A pee diaper, no big deal. It's a quick change, and the way they make them now, they're not wet or anything. It's just a quick roll up, and but man, you get some of those nasty blowout diapers. there's something wrong with you if you like to change a dirty diaper. Even my dogs agree. You can hear them barking in the background. But yeah, I avoided it for 30 years. And then one of my nephews, I was babysitting him. The first time I babysat him, one of them took a dump in the pants, and I looked at my watch and I go, oh man, the parent's going to be here in 20 minutes. I'm like, he can sit in it. So, so I avoided it. I avoided that one. I dodged that one. And of course, I told my wife about it, and you're married, so you get it. So my wife was indignant. She was like, I can't believe you let little Brantley sit there in a dirty diaper and tell his parents. I'm like, it was 30 minutes. I think I'm going to be okay,
Yeah.
And then the second time I'm watching the kids, man, the kid just, and then I'm looking at my clock and I go, Jesus, they're not going to be here for 2 hours. So I had a good 20 minutes of moral dilemma, like, oh my God. And then I had to change the diaper. And it was still just as awful as I remember it. And my granddaughter recently potty trained, so I'm not changing her diaper, but I don't know. No. So be honest, because your wife's probably not going to listen to this anymore. And my wife's going to listen to it. Have you ever left a stinky diaper knowing that it's a stinky diaper for somebody else to change?
No, not yet.
Wow.
Not yet.
See, now you passed the morality test, Robert.
Yeah, so I have the reverse that happens. My wife, I think, lucks out in a sense. There have been a few occasions, not so much now as my daughter gets a little bit bigger, but before, when my wife goes back to work, it was one of the first days she went back to work. Huge blowout. Like my wife goes in at 8 a.m. This was like an 8:01 blowout diaper. I'm like, of course, this is her time of day, apparently. And it's happened more than once. And so it's like that, in that case, what am I going to do? You're changing the diaper. You're not going to leave it because, it's only going to get added to, so to speak, as the day progresses. So, I've never been in that position where it's like, oh, well, but I have a feeling that, with various babysitters that we may find ourselves on the wrong end of that at some point.
Yeah. There's a clock. So now I discussed this with my son when he first had kids because I felt like he deserved a little bit of revenge for all the stuff that he put me through. So early fatherhood days. So it's still pretty new for you because you gave 5 months, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that the first 3 weeks where you just weren't getting any sleep because the kid was crying in the middle of the night. I mean, did you get that experience? Like, did you ever have one of those where you wake up in the middle of the night? And granted, this has been 35, 40 years for me, where you just, your eyes are barely opening and you're going, oh my God, not again. and then here's the other tried and true method. Did you ever see, I was the one that always had to get up because I feel like my ex-wife, she could fake sleep a lot better than I could, So like you kind of like open your eyes and you look at your spouse and you go, oh my God, are they going to wake up or is this going to have to be for me? Have you experienced any of that yet?
No, I will say that I remember the first night we got home from the hospital. We were pretty bad. And the thing was, like, we got home from the hospital and then, in the afternoon, and then the next day we had the first pediatrician appointment, because that's a thing. Like, as soon as you get home, like the next day or even that day, sometimes depending on the timing, like you go to that appointment. So we get home from the hospital and like, I think it was from like midnight to 8 a.m. Like no chance of either of us sleeping. Like the baby was up and she wanted to be awake. And so here we were, just kind of fighting through it. And then, 2 hours after that, we were able to take a little bit of a nap. She finally falls asleep, but then we had to wake up, 2 hours after to go to the pediatrician. So that was rough, but, we've worked it out that so I'm home during the day. And so my wife gets home from work and, we kind of split the duties, during the evening. And, then at night, she's closest to the bassinet. So she's much better at, this predates marriage. I am a deep sleeper. I hardly wake up for anything. It took a knock on the door. We lived in this apartment building, and the smoke alarms are going off in the middle of the night. It took a police officer pounding on the door to wake me up. I jumped out and, thought that because of the knock on the door, I thought someone was shooting, the way it sounded. So I jumped out, but it takes a lot for me to wake up. And so my daughter has not apparently cried loud enough for me to really wake up unless I'm already awake. Because my wife is much different than I am. She will fall asleep typically early. She typically goes to bed early. I like to stay up late. I'm usually up at until 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning some nights. So if I'm up and the baby wakes up, okay, I'll take her and, you can keep sleeping. But after that, up until 7 in the morning, it's like, forget it. If I'm asleep, I can't wake up. I don't know what it is, but I am a deep, deep sleeper. And I don't move for anything. You could probably flick my ear and I wouldn't move. So,
well, it's a good thing you and I didn't have a child together, because I'd go crazy at some point. Yeah, I had one of those. My experience with my kids crying in the middle of the night is that it would always somehow be integrated into whatever dream I was having. So, for instance, I'd go to sleep, and then I'd rob the bank. You would be the getaway driver, and, we're driving along the street, and then all of a sudden I hear the siren going. And then as I'm waking up, the siren would turn out to be, I'm like, oh my God, that's not a siren. That is my child crying. I have to get out of bed. Where's Robert with the getaway car? So yeah, it was, those were always incredible experiences. And, I said, I look back at them now and I laugh, but man, sometimes when you're in it and you have that huge sleep deprivation. Like I remember Thom Jr. the first couple of months with the new kid, and he's just wandering around like, I am a zombie, and I'm like, oh, I feel really bad for you because you did that to me.
Yeah, it's definitely something where I was fortunate. I got 4 weeks of paid leave after my daughter was born, and my wife took the paid leave through the state. So we were off together for that first month. And so that was really nice because, you didn't have to worry about, sleep really until you go back to work. And, I give my wife credit. Like when I went back to work initially, she's like, I've got the nights, don't worry about that. You sleep, whatever. And now it's been a lot better. Like she'll sleep and really only wake up once, maybe twice, depending on the timing, to feed, and then she goes back to sleep. So it's not, a constant like, oh, I'm going to be up all night situation. So in that sense, it's more manageable for my wife because she's the one that wakes up, and, it could be 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. She does the feeding, and then they both go back to sleep, which is good. So, but yeah, fortunately, I think we've made it past the worst phase, which is like, because she was born at night. She was born at like 9:40 at night. So for a while, like her instinct was, oh, I'm going to be awake at night. Wow. I'll sleep during the day and then be awake from like midnight to whatever. And it's like, no, please don't do this. But I think she's really gotten out of that phase. We've moved on to a more reasonable schedule at this point.
Reasonable. Yeah. When I was, until they turned 13, then they start sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night. But hopefully they're going to try not to wake you up at that point. So yeah. I'm almost out of battery power on my phone because I'm irresponsible, and I should have charged it fully before we started. But we're almost at the 30-minute mark anyway, so you're going to have to go. So we'll close with these final thoughts on parenting. And it's so unique for everybody. First of all, I'm happy for you. I loved being a dad. I know you're going to love being a dad, and you love being a dad right now. So quick answers, which neither you or I are good at, but let's try it anyway. What was the biggest surprise after having a kid? Like the thing you were like, holy crap, nobody told me this was going to happen. And what's been the most rewarding part about being a dad?
So the most rewarding part is just the I chose the profession I had because I think there's something new every day. And with my daughter, there's a lot of that same thing, like just the adventure I enjoy. She's getting to that stage where she's almost crawling. So that's been fun to watch. So just being able to spend the days with her, that 3 days a week, I'm home alone with her. My wife goes into the office those days. And so that's the most rewarding. The most surprising thing, that's tough. Just because I had nieces and nephews. And so some of those surprises emerged during my experience as an uncle. And I was like, oh, that's going to happen. But I think, one of the biggest surprises is just being able to see their development. When you bring, a baby home from the hospital, like there's not too much there, usually in terms of like personality or whatever. And then like quickly, that at least in our case, like that changed. Like she's very much, kind of bubbly and, likes to smile and that kind of thing. So that's been, because everybody's different, that's something that we forget. And so, that's, there's all of these books out there like, oh, this is what to expect at this age. And it's like, with our daughter, knock on wood, like she's done that, a lot of that stuff earlier than you're supposed to, according to these books. So it was like, wow, okay. That in itself is a surprise. Like we were told this date and, oh, she's doing this now. So, that's been quite an experience.
Awesome. Well, listen, it's just been great catching up. We actually, sometimes we're in the same zip code, but we just never managed to get together. So let's make a pact for within the next 12 months, let you and I actually see each other physically. And your wife, of course, Sarah, who I miss a lot as well. So
yeah, we'll have to do that because we're home, fairly often these days. The grandparents want to see the baby, so
that's good.
So we'll have to make that work. Well, we'll definitely make that work.
Awesome, and I'm sure you'll be a guest on the show again, and hopefully when I get my very first podcast award. See now, Robert, you can't see this, but we before we came on the air, I was like, we started writing at the same time. He has a wall covered with awards, and I didn't even get a pen from the newspaper. Like not even like you've written for the newspaper for 15 years. Here's your pen. Nothing.
Yeah.
I got nothing. I just got a bunch of Todd Rundgren posters and music stuff all over my walls. I've got a silver record, but I didn't earn it. It was given to me. So yeah. So anybody out there that's in charge of podcast awards, please nominate me. And you know what? I mean, just don't slap the guy that's about to present it to me, because then the attention will go on them and not on me. That's all I want.
Right.
But anyhow, as I said, Robert, it's absolutely just fantastic catching up with you. It's good seeing you, even if it is via Zoom. We had some great memories and obviously shared some laughs. And man, it's going to be pretty cool to see you being a dad and going through all the good, the bad, the indifferent. But yeah, there's nothing like it. It's my favorite thing in the world was being a dad, and I could say that because my wife's not going to listen, so I don't have to say being a husband.
Yeah, it's quickly become my favorite thing too, and just loving every minute of it.
And I feel like granddad is an extension of that. So it's not saying that being a grandfather is better than being a father. I mean, really, granddad is like the it's the dividend of dadhood.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure.
All right. Well, very good. And of course, if you didn't get a chance to listen to part one, that was a little bit more about a topic that I promised that we wouldn't mention, but we did coin the phrase Chihuahua syndrome. So I expect you to spread that. I spread that new terminology everywhere. And
we'll get that around.
We'll get that around. Get T-shirts made up. Chihuahua syndrome. So fantastic. All right, everybody out there listening, thank you. This was episode 23. Fantastic. Please keep listening, reviewing. Just don't come up with a fake name and start writing really mean things on the reviews. That's all I ask. So once again, this is the Bagel Logic Podcast. I am your host, Thom Jennings. We'll see you next time.